What is good, everyone? A-Rock Oakley back for another Building Wedge video. We are on part 11. Pretty crazy. The meta is happening. We're going to have some big tournaments. We're going to really start to see what decks are starting to shake out very soon. Um, but in that testing through many different means, we've started to kind of talk about things on the KTOD Discord in the Wedge thread. And start to pick out some things that we're really, really liking. You can see Tarkentown is on the screen right now, which is going to be a big talking point of this video, but we're going to get into a few more things as well. Um, the interaction portion of Tarkentown feels really good. A lot more decks understand how to play into Wedge, so the thermal oscillator version can sometimes feel predictable and sometimes has a very simple track, which is very good. When you get under decks and when you're faster than other decks, you win games. But there are times where one little point of where you can stumble will result in you kind of not having a chance to come back. But the extra 5 spots are now being occupied with some really, really good cards. We're talking about specific cards in comparison to others of why we like them and how we can hedge our speed and sometimes consistency in certain matchups. And I do believe Tarkentown can be a great way to not be blown out by a turn one, lose your unit. You can generally fight back with a response to one of their units, and that seems good. It's kind of always we've always known that about Tarkentown, but we definitely have always been on Thermal Oscillator and Tarkentown are both very good versions of the deck, and I don't think that either one is inherently better than the other. It's very much a meta call. Certain decks, Thermal Oscillator might be just to have a little bit better of a matchup into than the Tarkentown version, and Tarkentown will have better matchups than the Thermal Oscillator version. So it comes down to preference, and I think both are very, very good for Wedge. And if I was taking a deck right now, I think I'd be on the Tarkentown just to have that interaction and to make use of certain a few cards um, that I think can do a lot. And we actually get to use the Y wings, so we guarantee a little bit more options for our piloting, which is great. Uh, you know, it comes up of like, do you play Daring Raid or do you not play Daring Raid? And I think if you're in the build that I have going on right now, I'm just on for cause and just letting the Y wings do a lot of the work and or any units that I attack into to help build up Tarkentown, or if they are trying to be, if my opponent is being defensive, I'm using Tarkentown to make sure that that defensive play is not as strong as it could be. So that's a strong play line for us to have access to. I currently am trying without Daring Raid. I do think for cause the Daring Raid would be the only card that I would really like to be playing that isn't a heroic card, since leaving it on top is guaranteed 2 damage on the next turn, even if you lose the 1 on that turn. So that's something that I'd consider. Daring Raid is a very good card. It's a very efficient card. Going base, face, or cleaning up units is just great. So we're always kind of thinking about that. Some other cards you're going to see on here that we're going to talk about. We'll start with Fleet Lieutenant versus Leia Organa. So Leia with the restore is really good, but I think in the Tarkentown version we need to have a little bit more pacing, and this giving us it being a two attack swing as far as gaining us and them losing, I think is fine. But I think there's just more moments where Fleet Lieutenant not needing pilots and we're putting some stuff on the ground. We're using some more ground units. Fleet Lieutenant does work, and Wedges often go on the ground. Even though Leia does work on Wedge on the ground, but we do have cards that we'll talk about more is Cassian Andor, and I think that that can be very, very good. So a lot of the talking points that come up between Leia and Fleet Lieutenant is the 1 extra damage guaranteed? Is it worth it? I think sometimes it is. Leia is not really your best turn to play, where Fleet Lieutenant is. You can often um, uh, play a space unit, not pilot it, Fleet Lieutenant into pilot on the following turn, if that seems like a play line, guaranteeing some damage and then making a big unit and having a unit back, while also more than likely keeping initiative, which is what we want to be doing. Leia is not your best turn to play. You want to, because you likely won't have initiative that gives them a chance to interact with yours. So Leia ends up being more of a late game play. So I think Fleet Lieutenant has early interaction and later interaction as a pump on the 6 resource turn. The 3/3 with 4 cause is a lot of damage. So that's something to keep in mind. Leia still is really good and something I'm always considering. If we get into an aggressive meta, I would definitely want to be playing Leia Organa to use that restore and make use and allow it to work for me. Um, yeah, let's talk about next up. So that's kind of where we're at. So we have um, another card that we were talking about a lot was the Gorilla Attack Pod. I think that this and Cassian are now fighting for similar spots. Gorilla Attack Pod comes into play ready. It's on the 6 resource turn. I think it's great in Thermal Oscillator. It's for cause number 4 and 5. But Cassian is a good wedge flip turn play to where you can go wedge and Cassian on the ground, and that's 6 damage. That's a lot of, and oftentimes is guaranteed 6 damage. That's 6 damage that your opponent may not be accounting for. So, Guerrilla Attack Pod going into the resources in the early turns because you're not sure if you're getting the 6 resources with how aggressive we are is another thing to consider here. Cassian, always a resource, makes things easy. You get to keep more cards in your that you want to be playing, like pilots and other ships. Keeps that flowing for us. So that's where I think I'm leaning as far as the Guerrilla Attack Pod might be better into control decks, but the Cassian giving us reach is still pretty good into control decks since we don't need to necessarily worry about our hands, but it also is really good just as a turn to play and or a great resource, and the 5 but is relevant and helps us against the heavy discard decks. And I think that's where Cassian is really thriving. Quinlan Tarkentown is still really strong. You're going to see it in any cunning decks right now with a lot of discard. Cassian just feels just a touch better over the pod, which will be better into the blue villainy cards. So that's something to really kind of think about here. Now we have 2 cards that came up as cards we want to be playing in the sideboard, and that one of those is Cham Syndulla. I think that this is where it's best. You think it's into Han. I actually think this is best into green villainy, the ramp decks, because they might push heavily, like Piet Blue might push heavily to dominate the space lane to block you out, and then on turn 3 you just Cham, go to 5, put Wedge on the ground, and now you're pushing a 5/4 and a 3/6 on the ground. A Rebel Assault for 10 damage is like they if you've already pushed damage by that point that their Piet's flipping and getting ahead of you, this puts you in a really good place to switch lanes, and then following up with like a Rebel Assault or a 4 cause or a Chewie on the ground, you're starting to cook. So I think Cham is very good into that. I still think Cham is pretty good into Han. Can insulate you into guaranteeing you're getting your deployment, and I think it's good there as well. But mainly for against ramp decks, where is where I think Cham does a lot. He is also a rebel, which is awesome. So big time. Now our tech into Django is going to be the 5 speeder. The 5 Peter, as we've dubbed it over at the K2D Discord. Me and Dean come up with a great name for it. This is our answer into Juggernaut, Cargo Juggernaut. Is it Cargo Juggernaut? No, it's War Juggernaut. That card's insane. That's pretty much it. Being able to play the Snow Speeder, ambush into Django, and exhaust their Juggernaut if they TDR it out is where we want to be. The following turn, we can follow up with Blue Leader to take out Django, and if anything, we can attack base with the Snow Speeder to tap down the Jug. But I think it's also best to make sure that we follow up with something to keep the Django from continuing to tap us down. And one way to do that is to take out the Django and saving that. I think this is where the Django matchup is sometimes lost. Is saving this play line to kill the Django on a turn where you're going to go off. That's what you're trying to line up. Whether that's a Rebel Assault attacking with the Snow Speeder to tap the Jug and then take it out with the speeder, or take out Django with that, so then you can finish up stuff in the air, so your nothing is about to get exhausted. Those are the types of play lines you want to be looking for. So I think that this card is amazing. It's Rebel. It's heroic. It does a lot and really is one of our best options into Django. Sometimes they're not going to go for the Juggernaut, so it doesn't feel great to have, but it's one of their best cards right now. So force them to go for the Devastator because that's on 6 resources, and hopefully we've pushed enough and been able to occupy the game enough in other ways. Blue Leader ends up being very strong as a synergy card along with the 5 Peter. So keep in mind those cards. I think those are some of the best ways. Spec Force soldiers into your Sentinels, your green blue Lukes, to any deck playing Concord Dawn Interceptors or whatever. Got to have it. Fang Fighters are still great. Timely reinforcement, I think, in the aggro mirror, and potentially into some Django matchups can be great. Have a couple more questions. So one great talking point that we've talked about is what is a big difference between these two cards. So I think there are certain situations where you're going to have both of these cards in your hand and you probably need to resource one. Now, recognizing that is really important because there are times where you just keep both, right? You know that your units are going to survive. You can Rebel Assault into a 4-cause. GG. Amazing. That's 4 resources. That's one of the best 4 resource plays to really close a game because the next 4-cause you're playing is digging for your next answer, but whether that's Fleet Lieutenant, another Rebel Assault, another 4-cause. But if you can recognize that you don't think you're going to be more on like one unit and you're probably going to be playing Wedge on the ground, it might be better just to keep the 4-cause because they might be heavy on the defensive plan, so they're going to be going after your units. So that might be a time where you put this in the resources and you keep the 4-cause because the 4-cause digging for the second 4-cause is the dream. So that's a big point here of recognize when your events are going to be good or when if holding back to try and set up a really cheeky Rebel Assault play could blow you out. And it might just be best to keep the 4-cause and push your guaranteed damage when you can is great. Same vice versa. If you think 4-cause is not really going to do much and the Rebel Assault straight up wins you the game and gets you the actions so you don't get exhausted or tapped down by cunning or something like that, keep the Rebel Assault. But be looking for these moments where one is probably not, might be forcing your play lines into getting you blown out. So keep an eye out for that. I think that is a really, really good point to start to think about as we move forward. I talked a little bit about some problematic matchups. I think right now a lot of talks have been around Piet Blue, Django, Han 1, Cunning can be pretty tough. I genuinely think a lot of Sentinel decks, I think Luke 1 Blue is actually a pretty nuts deck because they just shield everything. If they get Alliance Dispatcher and we have no way to answer it, we're cooked. And they're just always putting shields, and they for whatever reason always have 3 Bright Hopes and Conquer Dawn Interceptors. So, but I think that deck is going to struggle into other matchups. So heavy Sentinel decks are going to be really good. Hence why I think we're always going to be wanting to have Spec Force soldiers in the deck and playing them at the right time to where we can Spec Force Rebel Assault for some big matchups. So yeah, I think a good balance of ships on turn 1 is always going to be great. I'm at 13 here. I think is really good. I like that. Luke Skywalker putting us up to 15, which puts us in a great spot. The Y-Wings can put in a lot of work with Tarkin Town, and they set up really well with Red 5. So just great cards to be playing. I know maybe I'll be able to flash the deck lists, but we've had Mean Dean, who's been playing Akbar in with Daring Raid in Tarkin Town, which I think Admiral Akbar is a fantastic card. Let's pull up the fish. He's been playing that card a lot, and he's liking it as his spice. And uh, Bird, who's also down in there, has been playing a single timely intervention with Daring Raid to make use of Sabine's Masterpiece, which I think is incredibly good if you have the timely intervention to make use of the damaging effects, which helps in Tarkin Town, making use of the experience, which is absolutely insane if you're leading with a Phoenix Squadron A-wing, or if it's a Bright Hope into this, that's also pretty insane. You can do a lot of work there. Uh, I mean, more conversations, about. I think Bright Hope is meant to be a three of. I think it's really good into the space heavy meta. The sheer amount of times I've just made Bright Hope a 5-10 with Wedge or a 5-9 with Chewie, and just stolen games it's been high, and we love to see that. And I think that that's Bright Hope's ability to do a lot of work, and its playability into Bright Hope, into pickup pilot, into repiloting is also very, very relevant. Uh, hmm. I think that kind of covers it, but make sure to jump in the discords and ask some questions, because I think that this deck is doing a lot of really good things. As for what to sideboard, certain matchups red leader doesn't feel as strong. So you might want to pull this out for your Spec Force soldiers or your Fang fighters, something like that. There is some merit to where if you bring in a line of Fang fighters, Syndulla, and timely reinforcement, your four causes come out because you now have a lot of hits that might not hit. Maybe not, because four causes is just still goaded and is still highly likely to hit 3 plus in those matchups. You can easily cut a blue leader if you're not going to see a line to making that work. You can drop a fleet lieutenant. It can be the R2D2 that comes out, since this is a free card essentially to just give +1/+1 and boost Nub. So that's another card that I'd like to maybe side out. I like to try and keep my lines pretty diverse, because I do like most of these cards into most matchups. So I don't necessarily always want to be cutting the same cards, because there are times where into certain decks it might not be great, but you just go red leader into R2 into Biggs or 9 Num, and they can't answer your red leader plus the 2 X-Wings that came with it, and it just wins you a game because you have created such an insane amount of damage. Um, we were talking about it just today that it's don't walk your wedge into getting blown out. Don't just pilot this dude into a confiscate, aggression, a fang fighter, a Poe attack, or something like that. Just don't do it. Guarantee put that dude on the ground. 3/6 is sick. Get your 3 damage in. You're gonna appreciate that damage, and you're gonna be able to math that damage to allow yourself to win games. And that's what a lot of what we end up doing is we shift to the ground in the later turns by playing Chewbacca and now Cassian and Wedge on the ground, and now a Rebel Assault is still a lot of damage. That's like if it's Cassian and Wedge, 8 damage, great. If it's Chewbacca and Wedge, 10 damage, even better. Like, we're talking about some really insane amounts of damage that we can start to push, and Rebel Assault is still a very live card. So look at it that way a little bit more. I honestly think Biggs is one of the best cards in this deck completely, just based on a 3/4 on the ground is efficient. He does way more as a unit, and it's amazing. He's also very strong with the 5 beater because he gives it grit, and that can be an absolute menace if the play line makes sense for you to go for it. So yeah, I do think we've made some really cool iterations, and there's part 12 will be at our the dozen episode, and we'll hopefully have some really good ideas as to more stuff about Tarkin Town and Thermal Oscillator. Maybe some other cards start to creep up. Maybe we're all on Timely Intervention like Bird's on. Maybe we're on Akbar. Who knows? Or the Daring Raids come in. This is where I would start. This is probably what I'll take to whatever first locals event that I'm able to play in. But I'll be jamming a ton of games, and hopefully some games on some Discords here very soon. So tune in for that. I'll try and make sure to set up a ping so you all see it. But yeah, if you have any questions, you'll see the deck lists here. And actually, I'll probably link both Mean Dean's and Bird's deck lists down below. So you guys can check those out because they're going to constantly be making iterations as well. So you'll have a nice plethora of options to consider. Yeah, this is a longer one, but I definitely think we're making some moves with Wedge, and I would not sleep on this deck. I think it does a lot, and let's go get some stuff done. Wedge is an amazing, amazing deck right now, but it takes a lot of skill to pilot, and the nuances are real. So don't be a numpty. Don't walk into blowouts. And if you are, that's what the care best games and stuff are for. You know, these games that you test. That's what they're for. You're supposed to kind of walk into stuff and learn through it. So it's good. It's really really good. So yeah, keep learning. We're all gonna get better. Stay awesome, everybody. May the force be with you.